Now we are discussing one of the very important question, and that is about arrow function. The main question I'm keeping is explain must know points of arrow function. But we are going to generate more questions out of the entire topic's discussion. So let's begin with this. The category of this topic is JavaScript language, and there will be 5 relative questions of arrow function. In most of the interviews, you will be asked about arrow function. The impression is created when you actually discuss functional behavior rather than just the syntax. 3 functional behavior which you must discuss is: number 1, this object does not work with arrow function. Number 2, arguments object does not work with arrow function. And third is you cannot use new to call arrow function. Now before we move on the above 3 points, very quickly I will also discuss the syntax and other minor points. In short, this will be a complete arrow function related tutorial covering almost all features of arrow function. So first I will begin with this code where I am writing the traditional way of function. This was the way we used to write in JavaScript, which we still write. It's not that it is extinct. So I say function, for example, test. Now you put parentheses for parameters and you have statements inside the function. This is how you write the function. And as long as calling the function is concerned, you give the name of the function. Now the very same function can be converted into function expression. Now this is another way of writing function, and this is a very common way to write function expression. For example, the test function we had, it was like this, function test, and you have statements. Now when you say that this needs to be converted into function expression syntax, it means you will write, let's say in the older JavaScript you used to say var, but now because we are using ES6, either I say let or const, and then I give the name of the function. So I'll say const test is equal to, and then we do not write this function name. So in a way you are assigning the function to an object called test. So you are giving equal to sign, that is you are writing the function as an expression. So this is function expression, and then you call the function with the name only. This is the only way we do it. Now when I say arrow function, it means arrow function is literally the replacement of this very syntax. Let me show you how. When we write the arrow function, we say const test is equal to, we do not write this function keyword, then we put an arrow after the list of parameters. That's it. So the function we had, which was function expression, now the very same syntax is of arrow function. So in other words, you can say that arrow function is actually function expression only. Now, if you want to pass parameters to the arrow function, you have these parentheses where you can say a comma b. In case if you do not have more than one parameter, you can avoid writing these parentheses also. Let me show you one practical example. I will create a function called sum, and this is going to be an arrow function. At the moment I am giving only one parameter, and I will just try to display the value of a. And I am calling the function. As long as calling is concerned, there is no change in it. So I say 5 here, right? And I'll save this and let's run this code. I'll say arrow.js. So we have the output 5 here. Now even if I avoid these parentheses, this is also fine, right? So arrow function gives you easier way, more clear way, as long as the syntax is concerned. So now if I run the code again, we see that the output is same. So if you have one parameter, you can avoid writing parentheses. Assume that you have 2 parameters, then you should write these parentheses. There is no other way. Now one more thing we can discuss here is, let's say this function is returning a plus b. Now there is only one statement in this particular code. Let's say console log here. I'll pass 2 parameters, 5,6 and console.log here. Let's run the code once. We have the output 11. So we have only one return statement. So what arrow function says that you can avoid these parentheses and you can keep this in a single line If you have just a statement and that to return statement, you do not have to write return. Now you see that it's just a single line function where it has a return statement, but we do not write it here. Of course, the first way we wrote was also a correct one, but in case if you do not want to have a return statement, this is a provision given by arrow function. These are few syntactical facilities given by arrow function, and that's why people say that arrow function is less verbose. That means you have less code to write and better way to deal with it. So when it comes to syntax, when it comes to new changes about syntax in arrow function, you can talk about parentheses are not required for single parameter, or even the return statement, right? That can be avoided for a single line. We also write IFI with ES5 syntax, right? What is an IFI? IFI is immediately invoked function expression. We do have the provision to write IFI with arrow also. Like if I just write the traditional way of IFI, let's say I write a code of IFI here. Now this is just a function expression in fact. If I have to convert this into IFI, what we do is we just do not give any name to the entire function. We cover this function into parentheses and then we need to call this. So this is a function which gets called automatically. This is IFI. IFI is a function which calls itself. Let's try this first of all. You see this function is called. I did not give any name to the function. I did not even call the function. But the moment the control comes on this line, it starts executing this function. We use this IFI to avoid global leakages. But right now my concern is to show that can we write arrow function with this? Yes, I can remove this function keyword and you just have to put an arrow. That's it. So in a way you can say that this is immediately invoked arrow function, something like this. Let's try to run this and we get the output. So with arrow function, if we want to have IFI, we can do that. Now let's discuss about those three important points. That is the this object, the arguments object, and the new operator. Assume that I have a function here, test. This is an arrow function and I try to refer value of this inside this function. If I'm running this code in browser, the output will be window. Here it will be the global object. Now remember, in the traditional way of function, even today when you say that I'm writing function with the traditional syntax, that is not the function expression. You write the function like this, function test. If you write like this, it means this object can have the local reference in this type of function if this function is called with the new keyword. But in arrow function, you cannot have the current reference. It will always point to the global environment. Let's run this code in the browser and see what is the output. You see that it is the window object. So now you see that the reference of this is not actually the function itself, rather than it is window. Of course, this code is written in the browser. Even if I put this code inside an object literal, then also it will point to window. Let's check that also. I'll create an object and I'll create a function here. Let's say test, right? Right now I'm using the traditional way, the way where object literal method is defined like this only, not writing the arrow function and just trying to get the value of this here. Let's call this by obj.test and let's run this. You see that it gives you the reference of object, that is the object literal. Now in the same case, we do have a facility to give function expression. That means I can say test is equal to, that is colon, right? Because I'm inside object literal. I'll put an arrow here. So this is an arrow function. Now if I run this obj.test, it's going to show me again the window object. So in short, this object doesn't work the way it used to work with the traditional function, right? When it comes to arrow function, this doesn't work with arrow function. Why? The reason is earlier the function also had a job of class. That is, the function used to act as a class also depending on the way it is called. Like if you call the function with the new keyword, then it will behave as a class. But now arrow function doesn't have that duty. Arrow function is just a function. It doesn't have to behave like a class at any point of time. That's why this is not needed to be referred in any way inside arrow function. So this is one thing. Second, the arguments object which used to show us the parameters passed to the function, like this one. Let me show you that. Now if I pass, let's say 4, 5, whatsoever, and I will just run this. You see, arguments is showing that these are the parameters passed to the function. But if I convert this into arrow function, I'll remove the function. Const test is equal to arrow and arguments. Now if I run this, it shows me the error. In short, arguments object doesn't work with it. So now what if you want to implement similar functionality? Then we do have the rest parameters. That is those 3 dots. We have already discussed rest and spread operator in detail. So you get the idea about how we can deal with similar situation in arrow function. I mean, you do not have arguments object. So how will you deal with this kind of functionality? So you have the rest parameters, right? So let's say here also one more time we can try it, though we have already seen in one of the previous question. So you just say 3 dots and you have the entire array. So now you see the output. There is also one more thing. You cannot call this function, that is the arrow function, with a new keyword. Naturally you cannot, because this will not act as a class. So let's say I have this simple function. I'm just saying hi inside this. And what if I say const obj is equal to new test? Now if this was a traditional function like this, function test, we could have written const obj is equal to new test. In that case, this function would have been a class. But now we don't have that facility because we already have class in ES6. That's why it is not needed. It's not that something is reduced or there are less functionalities in ES6. Actually, there is a better way to deal with a situation. Rather than the same function used as a class, used as a function, we don't do that now, right? Not anymore. So we already have a class keyword to create a class, right? So if I try this, certainly it will not work. It will give me the error. Right, so this is how, let me go further here. So we have the error displayed that test is not a constructor. Now let's discuss relative questions of this topic. The first question is, explain the syntactical features of arrow function. Now when I say this question, it means if you want to explain all the syntax related changes, then you can discuss about those parameters, that you can avoid parentheses, single line statement. If you have, you don't need to write the return statement. All those things you can talk about when this question is asked. Second question, why this does not work in arrow function. Now this question can also be asked that does this object work with arrow function or not? Then the answer is of course no. But the reason is that we already have a class keyword to deal with the classes. So we do not need the function to act as a class. So there is no point that this, which actually is used to refer the current context, is needed in function. That's why arrow function is free from that job. And that's the reason why this object does not work. The third question is, explain output of the following code with a reason. Now I have already discussed this, that I'm writing the arrow function inside obj. Normally if you write with the traditional way, then certainly it's going to refer the current context, that is the obj. But here, because I am using the arrow function, it's going to refer the global context. So if you are in the browser, it will be the window. Fourth question is, how can you handle arguments object like functionality in arrow function? So like, because arrow function doesn't support arguments object, you have the rest parameters which can be used with arrow function to deal with all the parameters passed to the function. The fifth question is, can you write ify with arrow function syntax? Yes, of course. We have already checked that if we use arrow function and if we want to have ify, that is it calls it immediately, automatically and calls itself, you can do that. This is the syntax, this is the code which we tried few minutes back.